Get this. Now we can get started. My name is Laree Daniel Favors, and I am the Executive Director here at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College. And I am really excited to welcome you to this virtual program. We're excited about this series, Breaking Down the Ballot series. Tonight's edition is going to be looking at ballot proposals in their totality. We'll be looking at ballot proposals generally, and then we're also going to focus on what will be happening with 4 ballot proposals that we will have on our ballot this November. My colleague and team member, CLSJ Voting Rights Coordinator, Isaiah Fenichel, is here. He's going to be guiding us through this conversation. And then I'm looking forward to joining for a more in-depth discussion about the ballot proposals that pertain specifically to racial justice. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. And once again, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you here to the Center for Law and Social Justice for this workshop. And for those of you who are meeting us for the first time, you should just know that the Center for Law and Social Justice is an organization that was founded in 1986 with the specific intentionality of speaking to how we could use the law to advocate on behalf of Black New Yorkers of African descent, specifically responding to the increasing incidences of police brutality, the murders that we now call hate crime, policing murders that were being implicated or that were impacting Black New Yorkers, in addition to decades of entrenched voter rights and voter suppression, in addition to housing discrimination, in addition to discrimination in education, and as it pertains to our cultural rights. And so the Center for Law and Social Justice was founded by a group of activists, organizers, attorneys, and yes, Black elected officials who came together recognizing that New Yorkers of African descent, those of us who are part of the Pan-African community, we deserve to have a legal center, an institution whose mission it is to use the law to powerfully protect, defend, and advance the needs of our communities. To that end, we envision a civically educated and an engaged Black electorate, one that is consistently working to build political power in order to marshal the resources and the political representation that our communities need to thrive. We address racial justice issues by providing effective legal advocacy, community education campaigns, much like the one this workshop is actually a part of right now. You'll hear more about that in just a moment. And facilitating research and building organizing capacity on behalf of New Yorkers of African descent and the disenfranchised. A quick note to begin, you've heard me use this phrase a couple of times, New Yorkers of African descent. It's a lot of words, but we also recognize that the phrase Black, while it has a lot of meaning and is very sacred for many of us, it is also a geopolitical designation. It's something that exists here in America in unique ways. And so we recognize that our community is comprised, yes, of Black Americans, but we also have African immigrants. We have Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Latinos, and members of the entire Pan-African community. And so we try to be as inclusive of those communities as possible. And how could we not? We are in Brooklyn, based at the Medgar Evers College. And so we have a lot to get through today. This is not going to be a lengthy program. This is one in a series of workshops that my colleague Isaiah will be telling you about in just a moment. Tonight is the first in our effort to really make elections palatable, understandable, make it make sense for our communities and in language that our communities can understand. And so I'm looking forward to getting into these ballot initiatives tonight. And as you saw from the materials, every Wednesday from now up until the election, we are going to have additional workshops that allow us an opportunity to really understand what is happening with the ballot, what's happening with elections, how they impact us, and why and how we can be involved in securing our future through the use of many, many tools. Tonight's tool, however, is going to focus on securing our future with the power of our vote. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Isaiah Fenichel, who is our voting rights coordinator. He is the newest member of the CLSJ team. He's definitely the most energetic member of our team. And so we very much value and appreciate him and the work that he and our many interns. Shout out to the Medgar Evers College students who are here tonight, who are also a part of our outreach efforts. Shout out to our Brooklyn Recovery Corps students. And of course, we are always excited that our home, Medgar Evers College, continues to be an institution known for having social justice in its DNA, as our new president, Dr. Ramsey, always says. And we're excited that this program tonight is an embodiment of that. And with that, Isaiah, I will pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Laree. Absolutely, as Laree said, my name is Isaiah Fenichel. I am the Voting Rights Coordinator here at the Center for Law and Social Justice. And tonight, rather than taking too long talking about the things outside, we're gonna just jump right into the conversation. So starting with the question, what exactly are these things called ballot proposals, right? In different places, they're called different things: ballot initiatives, proposals, referendums, things like that. Um, I'm not sure if anybody in the chat wants to take a stab at trying to answer before we jump into it, just to help speed the conversation a little bit. Does anybody know what ballot proposals are coming into the conversation? Give it a second in the chat. Yes, as we said in the chat, please feel free to drop your answers. Some of the topics we talk about can be a little bit slow at times, so it helps to really have that interaction. But if nobody knows the answers, I'm here to tell you. So that being said, ballot proposal. Let's see. Sorry about that. Oh, the chat is not activated. That makes sense. Seeing no answers. While we get that worked out, I'm gonna just go ahead and answer the question for you guys. Ballot proposals. So ballot proposals are a way for citizens to propose and create change. This is how we repeal a state law, constitutional provisions on the local level, dealing with local charters and things like that. So, right, there's two different ways generally that this idea of ballot proposals comes across. So, depending where you are, what legislative area you're in, which district, which state, there's different processes. One of the processes is through direct initiatives. So this would be like people have an issue we want to see change in. We come up with a petition, get a certain number of signatures. Once that number is met, the ballot measure is put to a vote in a general election, right? In New York, that is not the way they work. In New York, we have what are called indirect initiatives. So indirect initiatives are basically, first, what happens is a ballot proposal is brought by a state legislature or some other elected entity. Then they come together, vote on the agreement. Then it's put to a popular vote. So it comes from the legislatures before it goes down to the people. Tonight, we're going to be talking about two. In New York City, it's also a little bit different of a process, but I'll get into that a little bit later. So starting with like the statewide process, right? We have a state constitution. Every state has a constitution. America has a constitution, right? So we have a statewide constitution. That constitution can only be amended by constitutional convention or by referendum. So for the Constitution to be amended by referendum, that's basically what we're talking about tonight. Ballot proposals that ask voters to say yes or no for a specific initiative. In this process, right? So step one of the process is a legislator from both houses at the state level have to propose the amendment through a resolution. That means it has to go onto the floor of the state legislature. We have to debate it, discuss it, vote on it. And as this process is happening, the proposal is sent to the Attorney General's office for their review. It's not a mandatory step, but it's recommended to kind of explain any effects that the amendment would have to the Constitution. After that process is done, both houses vote on the proposal, and it has to receive a majority, right? Obviously, that's how democracies work. Receives a majority vote, and then in both houses of the legislature, and then it has to do that a second time through a second legislative session. So, right, the legislature only operates for in terms, right? So in 2-year terms at a time. So in one legislative term, a referendum or proposal can come up in the legislature. They'll vote on it. After it passes the first time, it has to go through a second round of votes. and be confirmed again by the next legislature to confirm that this is what the people want. After it passes 2 votes, it goes to the Board of Elections. The Board of Elections, basically they review it, review the language, and figure out exactly what it will say on the ballot. And then on election day, New Yorkers vote on that ballot. And if it wins and the majority has majority yeses, the proposal then becomes law. So that is the statewide process. New York City is a little bit different because, of course, New York City does things differently in all the ways. So for the New York City, so in New York City, we have what's called a charter, right? The charter functions essentially as the constitution for New York City. This is what sets the guidelines for this is how government is going to work. This is how the goals that we want to achieve. This is the way things are supposed to function, right? And in order to change that charter, to make amendments to it, it can be changed one of 2 ways. So first by legislation, so that's through the process, council would meet, make amendments, and pass those amendments into law. The other way is through a process called a Charter Revision Commission. What that means is it's going to be a commission of people temporarily appointed by a government body, and they're charged with looking over the Constitution, or not the Constitution, the Charter, excuse me, to be clear with it, to go over the city charter and propose amendments to it based on how they understand the issues. So the last major example of this, for those of you in New York City, the last major example of a charter revision was in 2019, actually. So it started for ranked choice voting. And with ranked choice voting, for those of you who remember, we're not using ranked choice voting in this specific election because these are dealing with statewide positions. But for New York City elections, we now have ranked choice voting where you rank candidates in order of 1 to 5. So that was a whole different switch. We're not going to talk too much about that tonight. But that switch was brought about through charter revision. And so to kind of jump again into how this process works to differentiate it from the statewide, in this process, it starts, the commission is established, it's made up of up to 15 people. So they're appointed by either the mayor, the city council, some elected body, and they're charged to review the entire New York City charter. So that's conducting research, that's taking public input, having deliberations internally to kind of talk about what they're finding and how they can move with it. The next step in that process is that commissioners issue a final report that includes the ballot proposals. So the commissioners review the charter, they take their time, review what's in it, how we can make changes and make it more effective and make it better for the people, right? They issue that report, and then that report contains the ballot proposals. Those ballot proposals are then placed onto the ballot for New Yorkers to vote on. And then once the proposals are approved and adopted by voters, the charter is then amended. So that's kind of how the process of ballot proposals works. Before we go any further, does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns to touch on in regards to ballot proposals? And also, this is a good opportunity to test if the chat is indeed working.
I think it might be, Isaiah. So hopefully, folks, if you can give us a heart emoji or some sort of chat indication to see if we can. But go ahead, you got it.
All right. As questions come in, there we go, heart emojis, people got them. Perfect, we love to see it. There we go. We love to see when technology works. That's fantastic. All right. But if nobody has any questions, we're going to keep moving along. I don't want to keep everybody too long with this conversation. But yeah, so this is the process that brings ballot proposals from an idea into an opportunity for the people to vote for the idea, right? And this year we have actually 4 different ballot proposals that we can vote on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one. first, we're going to start at the city level, actually. So, New York City folks, tap in. This is very important. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to our amazing executive director to talk a little bit about the racial justice ballot and the racial justice commission that's going on right now.
Thank you for that pass, Isaiah. I appreciate it. Y'all, can you please give it up for our newest member of the CLSJ team? We are very appreciative of all the youthful energy we are bringing into our space to help us make sure that we're not just talking about voting in elections for people or perhaps even generations that are very familiar with this conversation, but that we're able to bring this conversation home to folks who are less familiar with how our government works. So one of the things that I always like to say when it comes to the New York City racial justice ballot proposals, number one, I should say that I am a commissioner on the commission that was put together by Mayor de Blasio, and I'm going to talk about this in just a second. So I'm actually going to take two approaches to the conversation tonight. On the one hand, I'm going to talk about some of these elements from my commission perspective, and then I'm going to have to take my commissioner's hat on because I am a Black woman and I have a home in this city. I birthed my children here. My husband and I became a married union here, and so I care very passionately about what is happening in the city. My father grew up here. My mother's family immigrated from Jamaica. This is where they came. And so I have two sides of my house that I have to speak to tonight. So the first is going to be my commissioner side. So let me give you the formal perspective with regards to what happened or how we got to the point that literally racial justice is on the ballot. Just by a show of hands, how many of you participated in the protests of 2020 or know people who participated in the protests of 2020? Just give us a check. Okay, I see a couple of hands. This is good. Okay, so if you know people who protested in 2020, or if you were a protester in 2020, I want to personally thank you. And the reason I want to personally thank you is because what we saw during those protests, which came, as we may recall, for those of you who were not there, perhaps you don't recall, I just want to set the stage. You may recall we had just seen what happened to Ahmaud Arbery as he was chased down by vigilantes in a fit of white nationalist rage. We had just been told about what had happened with Breonna Taylor, who was murdered by police with a no-knock warrant. We had seen example after example, case after case where Black people were being gunned down, mowed down by police and through vigilante violence. We saw the rise of white nationalism, and all of that was before we got to 2020 and the pandemic. And the pandemic really revealed to a lot of people the severity. I say reveal because some of us knew, but it revealed to a lot of people the real severities that came with, and Isaiah, if you could take the slide down actually, because I want to be, hopefully we can see people. What happened in 2020 really revealed with the pandemic, it revealed just how severe the racial dilemma that we are having in this country actually is. And it revealed, for some people, it was new information. For those of us, it was just a real reminder of how extreme these situations were. But it also fed into a real national call for resistance. As you may recall, it wasn't just the millions of us who in New York and other states that came out to protest on a day. It wasn't just a weekend long event. It was week after week, month after month of sustained protests because people were finally beginning to grapple, I should say, with a lot of the racial injustices and the inequalities that had shaped this nation from before its founding. And so because of that, and because those protests were sustained, typically we see a mass protest, we see people come out and then they have to go back to work. We see mass protests, people come out, but then they have to get back to their day-to-day affairs. That didn't happen this time because what we had was a pandemic that basically all of us were just dodging full time and we were at home and all we could do was have time to think and have time to figure out how we wanted to act. So I love to say thank you to every one of us who went out into those protests because you triggered some things. You forced government, our local government, to respond in many ways all across the country. But here in New York City, you really pushed the needle. And so it's interesting because we have a number of folks who are a part of protests who have differing opinions about electoral politics. But this is one of those times where even people who have an approach to electoral politics that says, I choose not to vote, this is one of those opportunities where literally there is something for every single one of us to understand about this particular ballot. So those protests led to former Mayor Bill de Blasio enacting a number of measures and a number of changes that led to the development of the Racial Justice Commission. commission. And this Racial Justice Commission, which Isaiah is going to talk more about in just a moment, was basically charged with figuring out how we as a city could grapple with the structural racism that would lead to these sort of outcomes. How can we as a city grapple with the structural racism that will cause Black New Yorkers to make up less than a third of the city, but nearly half, if not more than half, of the occupants of Rikers? How can we move towards equitable justice when it comes to the distribution of resources? How can we move towards equitable justice when it comes to inequality in work, advancement, and wealth building, and within neighborhoods, the distribution of resources, power, and access to opportunity? And so this commission, which is comprised of 11 members, basically spent months, I wish we had more time, spent months talking to New Yorkers, hosting hearings in every single borough, listening sessions with experts, having meetings and presentations from people all across the country, yes, but most importantly, people from right here at home who were able to speak to what was happening. There were 11 commissioners appointed, and because of the way that we were appointed, we also have the formal powers of charter revision. Charter revision. This is important. And again, I know some of you on here are politicos, you know all this, and you can talk about it up, down, left, right, and center. We're kind of talking to you, but we're not really talking to you. We're really talking to the people who have not really known this information and who are not really clear about how all of this relates to their daily life. And so charter revision in this city, the Constitution is the founding document, the governing document for the country. The charter is New York City's founding document. And our mission was to figure out how we can look at the charter to make revisions or suggestions for how New Yorkers can make revisions to the charter so that, not that we would solve racial inequality, that's a much longer process, but so that we could put the city on a pathway forward towards moving in a direction of racial equity, so that we could be specific about how our city came to be, the racial inequities that formulated how we currently distribute resources and political power and access in equitable ways, and what we can do to move forward from that position. And so it's really important, I think, and we're going to talk about each of these ballot proposals in just a moment. But part of our difficulty as commission members was realizing, one, we had a very limited amount of time, and two, the charter is huge. It's huge. Hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of pages, thousands upon thousands of provisions. And if we were to go section by section asking how does racial inequity show up in this space, and what can we as commissioners do to address it, we realized that was going to be an exercise in futility. And so we chose instead to think about ways that we could impact the structure of the city and put the city on a path forward that would allow it to, regardless of who is in leadership. This is important because this is not about finding the great person who's a racial justice advocate or a social justice advocate to fill in positions in city government. This is about making sure that regardless of how you personally feel about equity, the city is going to be governed in such a way that it is moving towards equitable outcomes. And so we came up with 3 ballot initiatives that spoke to the findings of all the information that we had gathered from those hearings, from those testimonies, from the conversations we had with New Yorkers. And the findings that we came up with really drilled down to 6 patterns of inequity. The first is inequity in the quality of services that promote social and emotional well-being. Black New Yorkers, Indigenous New Yorkers, people of color, Latinos, Asian New Yorkers came out, white New Yorkers came out and talked about the lack of access that people of color have to quality education, healthcare, mental health services. They talked about inequity within and across neighborhoods as it pertains to things that inhibit our ability to thrive. Our very first session was in Staten Island. And in Staten Island, we got an earful about the fact that resources and social environmental burdens are not distributed equitably. Resources are not distributed equitably. Responsibilities are not distributed equitably. We have some communities that are oversaturated with the burdens of our community, oversaturated with housing shelters, oversaturated with a lack of resources. There's a twist there. And so the third inequality pattern that we found was inequality in work, advancement, and wealth building. Black individuals, Indigenous individuals, people of color, Asians, Latinos testified about the fact that they consistently experience inequity in income. And this is not new information for our community. We know this, but I need to be clear. The commission was moving based on the data and based on what you New York City residents had to tell us. The marginalization and overcriminalization of BIPOC bodies, the inequity and representation and decision-making. All of these were repeated themes. Oh, and let me not forget one of the most important, enforcement and accountability of government and entities. All of these were repeated themes that we heard over and over again. So the initiatives that we came up with were designed to not hit every single point in each of those areas of complaint. These initiatives are designed to create guardrails, if you will. Think about a train. If the train it follows the path, it's going to go where the tracks lead it. Those guardrails are the tracks that are going to lead that train in a particular direction. And if the train is operating appropriately, it's not going to veer to the right and to the left. It's going to go where the tracks tell it to go. The 3 ballot proposals that we came up with are designed to serve as those guardrails, those tracks that are going to tell the train of city government where it has to go and how it is going to get on a path towards beginning to be a much more equitable place for all New Yorkers. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Isaiah, who's going to break down some of the ballot initiatives. I personally feel very passionately about these initiatives as a taking off my commissioner hat and putting on my Larry Daniel Favors hat. I feel very passionately about them. I will be voting yes on each of them, and you're going to hear why, because it's important for us to know that literally, racial justice is on our ballot, and we have an opportunity to educate New Yorkers and let them know that this is available to them to consider and to evaluate, and ultimately come out and vote in a way that reflects how they feel about what these initiatives are seeking to do. Isaiah, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Larry. That was perfect. Absolutely, racial justice is on the ballot. Like it's not even to be a pithy slogan. This to say we literally have an opportunity to change the way New York City government operates, and to make it more equitable and just for all people. That being said, jumping into what the actual proposals are, the first of which is to add a statement of values to guide government. So that's Proposition 1 out of the 3 racial justice ballots. To explain a little bit more about what this means, let me kind of go into it, right? Proposition 1 essentially would add a preamble to the New York City Charter. So if you know the United States Constitution, right? We the people, in order to form a more perfect union. That's the beginning of the preamble to the United States Constitution. That statement guides everything that the American government is supposed to be doing. So in the context of the New York City Charter, there is not a charter right now currently. And in this, so adding this charter not a charter. There is not a preamble in the charter. Adding a preamble to the charter would be an introductory statement. And this is the aspiration. This is what we expect the government, what we expect New York City to be working towards, right? And in this preamble, what we would want to have is a statement that says not only like we the people, all of that, but that we are aspiring towards a just and equitable city for all New Yorkers, making justice and equity center to what we are trying to accomplish in New York. And then following that up, so not only would the goal be a just and equitable New York City, but adding a preamble and adding to that statement that the city must strive to remedy past and continuing harms, and to reconstruct, revise, and reimagine our foundations, structures, institutions, and laws to promote justice and equity for all New Yorkers. So specifically saying, we are working towards this goal. Not only are we working towards this goal in the future, but past mistakes that we have done, we are working to rectify that. We are working to make sure that the historical injustice is corrected. And that's very important. That this concept can change the entirety of how New York City operates with its plans. So that's Proposition 1. Proposition 2 is to follow up on this almost. And this is to establish a racial equity office, a plan, and a commission to oversee these goals of equity and justice, right? What this means, so right, this would require every agency and New York City itself, so including the mayoral administration, including every every agency you could think of, right? Every 2 years, these agencies would have to come up with a plan, with a racial equity plan that includes strategies and goals to improve equity and to reduce and eliminate racial disparities in New York City. Um, so what that looks like is requiring the mayor to create a plan that identifies and communicates the goals publicly, goals and strategies, not just what we're going to do for these 2 years, but what we want to do in 2 years, what we want to do in 4 years, what we want to do long term in order to improve racial equity and justice. The plan would also have data indicators. So saying we have to have metrics, like not only can you say, listen, we want to do away with pick your racial disparity issue. We want to do away with that issue, but we want to set the goal at this number. We want to meet this goal, and creating actual metrics to measure against, so that when we're analyzing the effectiveness of these plans, that we can say the city has made progress or it has not made progress towards these goals. Following up the plans, we would establish an Office of Racial Equity and appoint a Chief Equity Officer. And what their role would be is ensuring that these plans are supported, that these plans are brought to life and in action in every way across the city. So not only are we going to have these plans, we're going to have this office. They're going to work with every agency to provide the training and technical resources necessary to make racial equity a reality. They're going to establish the standards that of data collection and how they're going to report the information to make sure that those metrics that are set up are actually being met and aren't being messed around with. You know, and people can make numbers say whatever they want. But this would set provisions that say this office is determining those guidelines. It would also identify priority neighborhoods where the work has to happen, where disparities in equity, health, socioeconomic burdens, things like that, all may disproportionately impact these communities in the future, and saying we need to do the work in these communities and putting them as a priority, right? As well as citywide access and design programs, and just making sure that all of these plans, this office would be charged with making sure these plans become a reality. And then outside of this office, creating a commission so that we're continuously identifying where we could do better. So we have the first component, which is the plan itself, the office that helps bring that plan into reality, and then the commission that continues to see where the plans fall short, where the plans need to go next, and can identify exactly what our work should look like working towards racial equity. And that committee would be composed of 15 New York City residents, with the expectation that they have some experience advocating for diverse communities, to make sure that people's voices are being heard, and not only just voices, but voices that know what they're talking about. And this commission would identify and propose community reforms and priorities to help the planning process. So while you're making these plans, you're listening to what the commission is telling you to work towards. And that way you can identify which issues you want to work towards, right? And then they also are charged with tracking compliance. And this collectively just makes it so not only do we have a plan, but we have a way to make that plan real, and we have a way to make sure these plans continue into the future and don't just stop with the change of an election, right? So that is ballot proposal number 2, New York City racial justice ballot proposal number 2.
Isaiah, I just want to jump in really, really quickly. I told you I'm passionate about these topics, so I just wanted to add really quickly in terms of, because the last one I really want to make sure it gets its own space and time. One of the things that I love about ballot personally, that I love about proposition number 2, is that it is not talking about dealing with racism as it exists today. Right. I had a reporter who asked me, so is this going to deal with past racism, racism from long ago? Or is it, are we going to be thinking about like, how are we going to really measure it? And one of the things that I'm very excited about when it comes to this provision in particular is the fact that this is an ongoing process. If New Yorkers vote yes on this proposal and it actually passes, this will require every single city agency to engage in this multi-year process of looking back at how they have done when it comes to racial equity in the past, and then basing their plan for the future on the metrics that they got from the past. And I just want us to be clear, because a lot of times we say city agencies and people are like, oh, okay, New York City agencies. But when you think about all of the agencies that exist, and I just had them up, and of course now my computer is frozen. But when you think about all of the agencies that exist, we're talking about nearly more than 50 agencies. We've got the New York City Office of Justice Coordinator. We've got the Aging Department. We've got every borough president's office, the Navy Yards, the libraries, the Department of Buildings, the Campaign Finance Board, Children's Services, Administration for Children's Services, the Chief Medical Officer, the Civil Service Commission, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, and that's literally just in the first 3 letters. So when we're talking about every agency having to have a racial equity lens, think about what that means for our communities when it comes to the administration of children's services. Years ago, the Center for Law and Social Justice was the lead organization in a lawsuit to combat the racially disparate way that children were being removed from Black families. And we know that there is a history of racial inequities when it comes to the way our city agencies engage with our communities. Think about sanitation and the inequitable ways that some of our communities seem to always be pristine, gorgeous, and clean. And some of our communities, it feels like there hasn't been a sanitation sweep in years. And so think about when it comes to the Department of Land Use, city planning, citywide administration services, economic development corporations, the fire department, NYPD, every single agency, if New Yorkers vote yes, and they don't have to. That is why, as Isaiah said in the very beginning, this is a ballot proposal. You have a right to vote yes, you have a right to vote no. If enough New Yorkers vote yes, and proposition number 2 is enacted, then every single agency in this city will have to employ a racial equity lens. And I had another reporter who said, well, don't we have some people already thinking about this at different agencies? I'm like, yeah, sure. You can do a round of hiring the way many organizations, nonprofit and corporate entities have, and you can bring on your racial justice, your DE&I, diversity and inclusion, ESG experts who are going to come in. And now that we have this flood of resources that came in after the George Floyd protests, don't know how long those resources will be there. But you could hire a person, and you can hire a team of people. That's different than a mandate. Hiring a team of people who are inclined to work towards racial justice, in spite all of the intransigence that already exists in these agencies, yeah, that's an effort, and that's bringing in personnel. But if New Yorkers vote yes on this proposition, it doesn't matter how you personally feel as an employee of this agency. Your agency will be required to engage in a racial equity centering for how they distribute resources and access to the power within that structure. And with the first initiative, I know it feels a little soft and fuzzy. Oh, we're going to have a preamble, a statement of our values as New Yorkers. It's not just a statement of our values as New Yorkers, and those values being, and as you heard Isaiah talk about, recognizing the inequities that have been a part of the founding of this city until present day. It's not just about a statement of values, it's also about those guardrails. It's about instructing agency heads and about instructing our courts that when a decision has to be made, and there is a decision that could lead us in a direction towards equity, or a decision that doesn't, a decision that instead leads us towards continuing the status quo, based on the preamble, you're going to have to go towards the equity-driven decision. And that's important because it doesn't allow your personality to be determinative as to whether or not you engage in the pursuit of racial justice. If you are going to be a part of city government, if New Yorkers vote yes, and that's a question. Will we turn out? Will New Yorkers turn out and vote yes? We don't know. But if they do, then this is going to require every single agency to center racial equity in their forward planning, in their backward looking, and ultimately provide that information for us to be the final judge. And that is, again, putting us on the pathway towards a more equitable New York City. Isaiah, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Larry. And yes, just to amplify also in the chat, if you are seeing this, we have another representative for the Racial Justice Commission in attendance with us tonight. So shout out to Joe in the chat. He's going to be dropping some resources as we continue this conversation for you all to go directly to the source and learn more about these ballot proposals as we continue to have this conversation, right? And yeah, jumping off of what Larry said, these are proposals. So by no means are we saying you have to vote yes or no, you have the option. But that being said, this is a racial justice law center, and we wouldn't be ourselves if we did not get excited talking about the potential of these proposals, right? Moving forward, so right, that's proposition number 2. Proposition number 3. This one, out of the 3, I would have to say, I personally believe this to be the most impactful and has the potential to make the most change if it were to be passed. What this is to measure the true cost of living. So to kind of give this some background, right? Eligibility for public benefits programs is based on a federal government guideline, the federal poverty guideline that was established in the 1960s, and the criteria for it has not changed since it was first established, right? And what that criteria was, it essentially said that if your household income was 3 times the cost of a minimum food diet, so whatever you needed to sustain yourself, then you were considered to be living above the poverty. So the federal government's definition also includes for income, what they're including in that factor for how much your income is public assistance programs. So if you're including rental assistance, unemployment benefits, Social Security. So if you have Section 8 housing, if you're receiving unemployment, if you're collecting Social Security, all of these things are counted towards your income. And if your income amounts to 3 times the cost of a minimum diet, then you're considered to be above the poverty guideline. And this guideline is the same across all 48 states, 48 continental states, and the District of Columbia. What this guideline says, this is the real kicker for everybody that's in New York. I can hear all of the audible gasps and sighs that are about to come. According to the 2021 Federal Poverty Guideline, in New York City, a family of 4 does not live in poverty if they have an income, a collective income of above $26,500. As a single man, I live with my girlfriend, right, in Harlem. I can tell you it costs more than $26,000 for our cost of living as 2 people without children and no additional family. This proposition number 3 would measure the true cost of living. So what that looks like, this requires the city to measure the actual costs of living in New York City and meeting the essential needs. So this includes housing, this includes food, childcare, transportation, any other necessary costs. And it also does not include public, private, or informal assistance, because the fact that you are getting some money, that you are getting some assistance, especially in a place like New York City, does not mean that you have the resources necessary to live a good life. You may be able to survive, but you aren't living. And this strategy of this proposition is intended to focus on dignity rather than poverty. So rather than saying, well, you have enough to eat the bare minimum, you have enough to sustain yourself, and that's enough, this says you deserve to live a dignified life, including but not limit, including having your needs met, including housing, including childcare, including any other expenses of that type of sort, right? And the follow-up to that is that the city would then be required to report annually on this cost of living. So when in the future we're doing, when we're doing budgeting, when we're allocating funds and resources to communities in need, to people in need, rather than saying, well, if you're a family of 4 making more than $26,000 a year, if you're a family of 4, you're fine if that's your situation. This would say whatever that true cost of living is, that's what needs to be measured in terms of resources, in terms of funding, in terms of allocation of how things are about to work in this city. And so that's why personally, I think proposition number three is a fantastic thing. And people have the opportunity to vote yes or no on it. But that being said, just realize this is a very important thing. Um, and we have other resources going into the chat right now. Yeah, so this is the third of the three ballot and three racial justice ballot initiatives in New York City. So before we go any further, these are very important. As Larry had mentioned, these are born directly out of the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020, of all the people who were in the streets, myself included, a lot of my colleagues in the streets for almost every day for over a year. This is the end result of that. And this is what protest turned to legislation looks like. So definitely, I would consider doing more research and getting in touch, tapping into all these resources that are going into the chat to get involved, to make sure that the message is being spread about these ballot proposals, because New Yorkers have the opportunity to directly make their voices heard, to make all three of these things a reality. Um, I'm going to pause there in case there's any questions, comments, or concerns in regards to any of the three ballot proposals. So feel free to drop anything in the chat.
Isaiah, looks like we have one question. It says, or comment. And Andrea Rogers says, I don't want to disrupt, but it looks like these propositions will help to improve data collected to support planning. And I think that's exactly right. Having access to the data so that we can plan more equitably is a huge issue. Not being able to really know what we're planning for is one of the challenges that we have. And as Isaiah mentioned, just looking at the true cost of living, being able to factor that in accurately when we're determining how much should one have when it comes to childcare supports, food supports, healthcare supports, housing supports. If we're using real numbers as opposed to the artificially low numbers that were that Isaiah explained, then it gets us a much closer to creating that more equitable vision of the city. So that's absolutely right. Isaiah?
Absolutely. And so yeah, if there's no other questions, comments, or concerns, I'm gonna move on to the next ballot proposal. Just to amplify in the chat, Joe Rivera is also posting everyone. There's additional links to resources in the chat off of the Racial Justice Commission website. You can sign up to volunteer to help spread the word about this, access the website so that you can get more information and do more research. Any questions, anything that may come about, please contact somebody and get the information you need to make an effective vote on election day or any of the other days before that. But we'll talk about that more later. That said, moving on outside of New York City, so there are three New York City ballot proposals that people can vote on. There's three of them in New York City, but there is one that the entire state of New York is eligible to vote for and will be voting for on election day. That fourth proposal, which is the statewide, is for the Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act of 2022. What this proposition does, outside of the racial justice things, again, this is not New York City based, this is the entirety of the state. What this proposal would do is issue $3 billion in general obligation bonds, meaning that the government has to allocate $3 billion to projects related to the environment, natural resources, water infrastructure, and climate change mitigation. To give some context to this proposal, the last Environmental Bond Act in New York State was passed in 1996. That act in 96 issued $1.75 billion and helped lead to forest preserve purchases in the Catskills and the Adirondacks. It helped conserve land and water across the state, including Hudson River Park in the city, as well as providing clean drinking water by dealing with the effects of climate change and pollution in water supplies. Um, Following that up, about 12 years after this bill passed in 2008, the New York State Department of Health issued a report that found the state needed just about $40 billion to modernize and upgrade water infrastructure, including a lot of the dams, aqueducts, bridges, and things of that nature, because they were starting to approach the 100-year mark of since they've been built. So a lot of them went back towards the Great Depression era, towards New Deal programs that helped build things through the Public Works program. Uh, so what this new act of 2022 would do, it would enable, so it issues $3 billion in general obligation bonds, but it also enables $4.2 billion for multi-year investments across four different categories. So the four different categories, $650 million goes to water quality improvement and resilient infrastructure. So making sure that the quality of our water and what is providing drinking water to the people, drinking water, all water, is protected and going against climate change and making sure that it is not being polluted and that we have clean drinking water, right? Another 1.5 billion would go towards climate change mitigation. So things like heating protections, things like insulation protections, different avenues that can help mitigate the effects of climate change, as we're seeing, right? We're seeing a lot of different floodings, we're seeing overheating, we're seeing blackouts, much more than we have in years past. So this money would go towards that. Another 1.1 billion for environmental restoration and flood risk reduction, specifically in New York City, going back towards Hurricane Sandy, Irma, all of the different mega storms that New York City's been hitting with, and even a few times this summer off regular thunderstorms. Flooding has been increasing, and you're seeing the subways start to flood. You're seeing all types of different things that did not used to happen. So $1 billion would go towards that type of risk reduction to make sure we're restoring our infrastructure and reducing the risk of future climate change. And then the final $650 million is the fourth category, is for open space and land conservation as well as recreation. So these are our state parks. These are these wide open areas where we're making sure that we are protecting nature, that we're making sure that we're not just concrete jungle, but we have some trees, that we have, the things that we need to make sure the environment is still staying healthy and sustainable for the future, because obviously we all still need to live here. And this act also could help lead to supporting 100,000 jobs. It could help with all types of creating good paying jobs, helping to bring environmental returns and things of that nature. This is not advocating, this is just literally what this job, not this job, what this proposition could do for New York State if it were to be passed. So outside of the New York City racial justice ballot proposals, we have this statewide proposal. And in this proposal, New Yorkers can vote yes or no. And I'm gonna just kind of to recap, you can vote yes or no on this. If you vote yes, that gives $3 billion, that issues the $3 billion. If you say no, then you're voting against the $3 billion. Same with the three racial justice proposals. The first of which, if you're voting to approve the preambular statement add a statement of values to the government, that would be yes, we want to add this statement of values, or no, we don't want to add this statement of values. Yes, we want to create the racial equity office, the commission, the plans, or no, we don't want to do that. Finally, yes, we want to establish a true cost of living, or no, we don't want to establish the true cost of living. So these, unlike a lot of other things where we could talk about voting and we could have a conversation about whether or not your vote makes a difference in the process, these 4 ballot initiatives, these 3 racial justice ballot initiatives and statewide environmental initiatives, all of these things are voted on directly by the people, meaning that if we vote yes for all 4 become law. If we vote yes for some, no for others, the ones we vote yes on become law. They become the standard. Um, and that is directly influenced by the people. So to circle back to Larry's point, these ballot proposals are a direct result of activism, of organizing, of getting in the field and making your voices heard. So now in the final step of the, not even the final, I don't even like using that language because we have to continue afterwards, but in this next iteration of the process, all we have to do to make these things a reality is vote on them. And that being said, so if there's any questions, comments, concerns about these 4 ballot proposals, please feel free to throw them in the chat. As you guys are doing that, I'm just going to read off some of our resources that are available to the community to help you get voter ready for election day. So first of which is our Center for Law and Social Justice voter guide. I will drop all of these in the group chat after I finish reading them off. But this voter guide, when you access our website, if you go to clsj.org/voting-rights, you can put your email in, we'll send it to you directly. It's a digital copy of a 10-page voter guide, all of the information you need having to do with this year's election, your rights as voters, where to find your poll site, how to register, how to do all the things, as well as what's on the ballot, where to vote, and all the good things. So there we go, right in the chat right there, CLSJ voting rights for the voter guide. Next up, if you want to get in the field, or actually if you want to make your voice heard beyond voting, before we even get into getting in the field, if you want to make your voice heard beyond just voting, we don't want to ever just tell people to go out and vote, right? As we're having these conversations, we want people's voices to be heard, and it's a continuous process. So please fill out our Center for Law and Social Justice community survey. In the survey, you can tell us whether or not you're going to vote, why you think voting is important or isn't, what you think the important issues in your community are that need to be addressed, who's doing the work, how well your elected officials are representing you. All of this helps us know how we can be better advocates for our community to help make it a better place, right? So that's the second resource, and that is going to be in the chat as well. I'll add that. Give me just 1 second. And then the volunteer sign up form. So if you want to get into the field, if you want to go on the ground and do the good work with us, get involved with the Center for Law and Social Justice, you can sign up to volunteer with us. We have so many different events. We got phone banking, we have outreach in the field, high traffic canvassing, all of that. And there's so many different ways for you to get involved with us in the Our Future, Our Vote campaign, bringing all of this information to the community. Last but not least, we also have the rest of our ballot breakdown workshop series. So Workshop Wednesday, every Wednesday, 7 p.m., 7 to whenever we finish having the conversation, we're going to break down every component of the ballot, everything that's going on there. Tonight, we talked about ballot proposals. Next week, we're going to talk about Congress. We're going to talk about U.S. senators and U.S. representatives and who's on the ballot, what it looks like for New York in this election. After that, we're going to talk about the executive branch, the governor, lieutenant governor, comptroller, what that looks like as well, working our way down the list, state legislatures, the state judgeships, all of the things. We really want to make sure we're getting all of the information, not just voting, not who you're voting for, but understanding what your vote is doing. And the links for all of these workshops are in the chat right now. Thank you so much. Larry's uploading them as I'm going along. So that being said, feel free to check out any of the resources. If you have any questions, if you have anything, reach out to the Center for Law and Social Justice. So really quickly, before we wrap everything up, the one last resource we're going to provide, I want to show you guys how to fill out the ballot, how to cast your vote for these ballot proposals as well as the other positions. So this language specifically is going to appear on the back of the ballot. They'll have abstracts, otherwise known as summaries, available at your polling site, so you could read what these propositions are, read a summarized version of what it will do, all the things we talked about tonight. They'll be available at poll sites, as well as translations provided in languages that are required via the Voting Rights Act, plus other languages at location-specific areas. Shout out to the Civic Engagement Commission doing that work as well. That being said, I'm going to pull up a sample ballot. This ballot is from the Center for Law and Social Justice, from our address at home there. But what I'm going to do for you guys is just show you kind of what it looks like. So let me zoom out. Can someone just throw a thumbs up in the chat just to make sure you guys are seeing what I need you to see? Perfect. Thank you so much, Jemima. I appreciate you. So on election day, if you are going to the poll site, or if you're voting early, or if you have an absentee ballot, you're going to receive a ballot that looks something like this. On the front end, you're going to have all of your positions. So that's this area here. On the left side, it's going to name the offices on the ballot. So governor, comptroller, attorney general, senator, so on and so forth, all the way through. Then by party, from left to right, it's going to be the candidates. First with the Democratic nominees, then the Republican nominees, then the conservative nominees, then the Working Family Party nominees, and so on and so forth, right? And then in the right-hand corner, you have write-in candidates. So if you are writing in a candidate, you do that in this box over here. Once you fill out your candidates, once you do all that, whichever order really that you want to do it, on the back end of this page, you're going to have the ballot proposals. So as you see on this side, it's a little bit horizontal. You're going to have to turn your ballot when you're filling it out to do it. But flip it over. These are the 4 ballot proposals. As you see right here, proposal number 1, the statewide proposal for clean water, air, and green jobs environmental bond. That's the statewide act that we just talked about. You would fill that out right here. Next up, proposition number 2 would be that statement of values to guide New York City government. This is the citywide. So only in New York City will you be seeing the other 3 ballots. Everybody in New York State will see statewide. Only New York City will see the racial justice ballots. Proposal number 2 would add, so then you click add in the statement of values, whichever one, not click, you're going to be filling it out with a pen, fully filling out these little circles, whichever one you want to vote for, yes, no, whichever it is. So that is how you would fill out the ballot for candidates. I'm not going to go into how you fill out for judicial candidates. It's a similar process, but if you want to hear about that, please join us for our judicial ballot breakdown workshop. That being said, I'm going to kick it back. Actually, let me not say that. Let's see what's going on. I'm going to open the floor up for any questions, comments, or concerns. Let's see. I'm just going to go into the chat. Of course, there we go. Of course, shout out Civic Engagement Commission doing the great work, as well as the Racial Justice Commission. Let's see. How can you save the chat? Absolutely. Thank you, Nicole, for answering that. Yes, if you want to save the chat, click on the 3 dots in the right-hand corner of the chat. It should bring up a drop-down menu, and the first option is to save the chat. Cutting and pasting into the Google Docs. I love to see it. Can we post a link to a Google Doc or website location listing all this good info? Definitely possible. Absolutely. We will be posting tonight's conversation, so you could go back, revisit it, as well as all of this information can be found in the Center for Law and Social Justice Voter Guide, as well as on the Racial Justice Commission website. And all of this should be there. And if it doesn't work, I'm going out. There we go. Our link tree as well that has access to everything. So click the link tree and it'll bring you right to all the events, all the resources that we have. HG, we're gonna find a way to get you the chat. We're gonna definitely find a way to get you the chat. If not, all of these resources will be getting shared in some form or fashion on this Center for Law and Social Justice website, as well as our Instagram and social media. So feel free to sign up, follow us on social media, do all the things. Are there any questions or comments about the ballot proposals before we finish up? Perfect. All right. So last but not least, this is the important part, just a little bit of housekeeping. Thank you so much. Joseph is checking off and we can share the email. There it is, Joe Rivera. You can reach out to him directly from the Racial Charter Commission. His email is in the chat. Once again, we're going to try to get all the chat info loaded up and get it to everybody in here. But most importantly, some housekeeping things before we finish up. Make sure y'all are registered to vote. Voter registration, obviously, is when you put your name down, let everybody know you want to vote, you want to be registered and recognized, so that way when you go to the polls on election day, it's no challenges and then you're good to go. Some requirements to vote in New York: you have to be a citizen of the United States, including Puerto Rico, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. You have to be living in any of those states when you are born, any of those places, or have some form of United States citizenship. You must be at least 18 years old on or before election day. But if you're 16 or 17, you can pre-register so that when you turn 18, whatever election is happening that year, other plug, there's an election every year till 2028. So if you're 16 or 17, you can pre-register, and when you turn 18, you're good to go, can just go to the polls and cast your ballot. And as of May 2021, all New Yorkers who are not currently in prison for a felony conviction are eligible to vote, including those on parole or probation. Nicole, you said 2029. I think you're actually right. I might be misspeaking. I know for sure, though, every election till 2028. Definitely every election till 2028. Sorry about that. Pulling other things up. Here we go. Last but not least, if you have a New York State ID, you could register via voterreg.dmv.ny.gov. And go to the motor voter program there. You just put in all your information and then you'd be registered to vote directly. If you don't have a state ID, you can contact the Board of Elections in person or by phone or email. See our voter guide. You can get that information in there as well. Also on vote.nyc.org, you can go there and that also has all of the information. Once you're registered, then this is the important part, getting out and casting your ballot. So you can vote by mail, absentee ballot. You have to request a ballot by Monday. That's the old dates from the primary. The new date is Monday, October 8th. I'm gonna put this in the chat. Or excuse me, yeah, request a ballot by Monday. Excuse me, y'all. Sorry about this. Request a ballot by Monday, October 24th. Once you request the ballot, they'll send it to you. You have to fill that ballot out by Tuesday, November 7th, or by Monday, November 7th, and return it for it to be counted and tracked. So these are the old dates. I'm gonna send, you could have the new dates, all that information is in our voter guide. Just to clarify, these dates are from the August primary, so point of correction. I'm actually gonna get them off the screen and just tell y'all when you could go. So early voting will be open from Saturday, October 29th, all the way through Sunday, November 6th. And then the final day to vote, otherwise known as Election Day, will be Tuesday, November 8th. The polls will be open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. And to find your poll site, you go to findmypollsite.vote.nyc. If you're outside of the city, Google works great. Also access our Center for Law and Social Justice voter guide, because you can put in your address there and it can help you with any information you need as well. That being said, if there are any other questions, comments, concerns, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm also going to put my email in the chat for anybody who wants to contact, get involved outside of this conversation or ask any question. Do my best to answer you as soon as possible. All of that is to say, thank you all so much for joining us for the first installment of Workshop Wednesday, our Breaking Down the Ballot series. Again, this conversation will be posted, so feel free to come back and review it, and join us next week when we break down our congressional ballots, so our Senate, our candidates for Senate, as well as House of Representatives. Thank you all so much and have a great rest of your night. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your night.